Hello, everyone, and welcome to John and James Live. My name's John Hastings, and with my co-host James CeeLo and Mr. Steve Phillip, our special guest today. How are you, Steve?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, John. Good to see you.
Excellent.
You both. Sun is shining in North Yorkshire, so we're all kind of anticipating after a long winter that we maybe are moving towards spring or
a bit
summer.
of sunshine. A bit of sunshine would be nice. But I really appreciate you coming on, Steve. To be honest, super appreciative. So Steve is from the Jordan Legacy, which I saw you on LinkedIn. So tragically, Steve's son passed away, Jordan, through suicide in 2019. We had Caroline Roodhouse on the pod not long ago to talk about her husband passing of suicide, and it's one of the the highest amount of people under 45 for men to die from suicide. Is that right, Steve?
Yeah, I mean the statistics are pretty shocking, I suppose, when you read them out, and we know that that age group up to kind of males of 45, biggest killer of men under 50 essentially is the kind of common line there. We know that 75% of all suicides, in fact, are male. But I think when we look at men and women, suicide is the biggest means of death for men and women under 35. And if you look at the fact it's not cancer, it's not diabetes, it's not road traffic accidents, it's not heart attacks, it's suicide, claiming the lives of men and women under 35, and Jordan was 34 when he died in 2019, then this is an issue that we need to be talking about as we are today.
Yeah. And Steve, first of all, what's a question that nobody really asks on this subject? Because you've done so many talks, haven't you, over the last 5 years? Is there something where people are missing the mark, or they're not asking the right questions on this topic, or something that you've found out that nobody thought about, or something that you never thought about before?
I wish I was that bright and intelligent, John. But actually, it's a really insightful question, actually, because I had to think for a moment as you started to ask that question, because I think the question that isn't asked quite often is why is this happening? Why are we losing so many people? What's causing this? I think everyone's shocked by the numbers, but too few people, other than those working in the suicide prevention space, are really asking that question. Why? I don't think even the government, I don't think, is really asking that question at a deep enough level.
Yeah. And from your research, Steve, in the last 5 years, is there anything in particular that you could say is a contributing factor, or is it so multifaceted and complex that you have to take each situation into individual context?
Yeah, it is really complex. I remember in the days and weeks following Jordan's death that I was consumed with wanting to know why, because it did come as a real shock to us. It shouldn't have done. In retrospect, I had a son that was diagnosed with clinical mental health illness of anxiety and depression some 4.5 years prior to his death, and now we kind of wind things back and look at some of the signs we now recognize clearly through the work, and I talk about these signs. It shouldn't have been a shock. But in those early weeks, I was consumed with finding out why, reading books, and that led me to a very early conclusion that suicide was due to a mental illness, an illness of the mind, let's say. And I held that position, not for very long, I have to say. But that's a conclusion I think a lot of people come to. Even the government right now, when ministers will stand up at PM's question time and say, will the Prime Minister promise to take action to reduce suicides? And what I hear continually coming back is we've just invested in another 5,900 mental health crisis nurses in our NHS. So what that immediately suggests to me is that the government think it's just a mental health issue, but it's far more complex. It's a mix of socioeconomic, biological, personality issues, It's a whole range of complex things, which any one of or a number of those things coming together for somebody who then feels kind of defeated and humiliated, and then trapped with no way out of whatever that circumstance might be. It could be a relationship breakdown, loss of a job. It could be a long-term chronic illness. It could be gambling debts. It could be a whole range of things. Once that person reaches a point where they feel a sense of complete hopelessness, then that's when any thoughts of suicide are likely to turn into some kind of action.
Yeah. Steve, can I just get a sense of Jordan as really from the sort of the boy to the man? Can you just kind of give us an overview as to, you know, his character, what he was like as a kid growing up, and just
thank you.
I don't want him to be remembered as a kind of a statistic and this thing that's happened to him, and we're talking about mental health issues and things like that. I really want to get a sense of him as the person.
Thank you, Jack. I think you're absolutely right. And the talks that I deliver, there's always one big slide with multiple photographs of Jordan in different scenarios on there, because the statistics paint one picture, but what we have to remember, of course, is that every person that dies is the potential loss of a human life, and all that person would have impacted positively, hopefully, on those around them and to society as a whole. And Jordan was a relatively quiet young lad growing up, but quite a sensitive child in many respects, and good lad. Yeah, certainly it didn't cause us any great consternation or heartache. And as he grew up, he developed this persona and a huge network of friends, particularly through his university days. He was seen as certainly in his later years, in his 20s and beyond, the kind of relatively cool guy, apparently. I've heard his friends say, and in terms of he always dressed very smartly, looked well. He was a good-looking lad, over 6 feet tall. Obviously didn't follow in his dad's footsteps in that respect. And they would talk about him as the guy that when he walked into an event, kind of everyone's heads turned. Apparently his dance moves at weddings were legendary. But he was also not too cool. And what I mean by that, a lot of his friends, were telling me afterwards how if they'd been out on a Saturday night in Leeds or Newcastle, they'd look back over their shoulders to see where Jordan was. And it wasn't unusual to see him knelt down talking to a homeless person or a busker or somebody that wasn't in a fortunate position. He would also be the first to jump in a car if a mate was struggling and needed help. It didn't matter how far it was, whether it was the other end of the country, he would be there. He was always very much someone for the underdog and very, could get really quite emotionally involved and connected with the situation. If he disagreed with something, you kind of knew if he thought someone was being wronged in some way. And that, I understand, was manifested itself in school, where he'd look after mates that were being picked on. He'd be straight in there, and he wasn't necessarily a big, strong, tough kind of lad in that respect. So yeah, definitely somebody, a sensitive lad, huge network of friends, great loving family, and great relationships. Jordan was someone who people looked at and envied. He had his own house. He had a successful career as an officer with the Independent Office for Police Conduct, the IOPC. So in many respects, people would look at him and say he's got it all together. So when this happened, you can imagine the ripple effect of that was, where did that come from for many of Jordan's friends and people that knew him?
Yeah, so that's a bit confusing, isn't it?
Sense. Yeah, we get this sense, don't we, from, situations like Jordan's, that it was a complete surprise, that nobody had any idea that this was going on underneath the surface until it manifested itself in this extreme, tragic way that we don't. And there's the questions we're left with afterwards. It's like, well, how could we not have seen it? How were we in this situation where we were so close that seemingly they were the life and soul of the party? And that in itself is a kind of a mask for this more insidious thing that's going on underneath, that it's so complete that there's very rarely any idea that this is a potential thing that's going to happen. So in terms of the aftermath, Steve, how do we even begin to unpack that as a society, or with people that we don't have a concern about, but this could be going on hidden? How do we even begin to start to have that conversation where there's no apparent surface manifestation of this thing happening under the surface?
Great question, James. I think one of the things we've lost in society is a degree of real connectivity. If we think long before social media and decades ago, in the days of kind of what was known as the extended family, where everyone lived on the same street and granny and auntie was there and you moved between each other's houses, we lost that in the 60s. But then we had what was known as, I remember this from school days, the nuclear family, which was mum and dad and the kids. But as we move forward, of course, even that has been broken down now with divorce rates, far higher than they've ever been. Over 2 million children, I think I heard the other day, do not have a father figure in their house. So what's not happening now, because of the busy family dynamics, usually both partners working, kids being hustled and moved from playgroups to wherever, we're not having this kind of mealtime communication and chats, real kind of meaningful and purposeful conversations anymore. Our connections are very superfluous, aren't they? Their Facebook, their Instagram, their WhatsApp messages, they're not of any depth very often. So I think, to answer your question, James, that we wouldn't necessarily need to ask deeply about mental health issues if we were just having more frequent how are your conversations taking place within families and within other environments as well. So I think we need to get back to that in whatever way we can do.
Do you find, Steve, there was some potential trigger events that spiraled mental health? Because I know when I got divorced, I went from a place where I was seeing my kids every day to then only seeing them once every 2 weeks. And if I wasn't into personal development at that time, for the average guy, I think people would consider ending their life. Even I was thinking I didn't care if I woke up the next day at that time. And I think there's an assumption that men will just get on with it. It's fine, that. But if it was flipped on the other way around and you took the kid away from a woman, I'm not basing this off of a gender war, but I think for men, some things that happen like that, you're sort of seen to just be able to just get on with it. So I don't know if there was any times in Jordan's life where there were specific events or something that happened that maybe the time when he started to go on to medication and things like that. Was there anything going on at that time?
Oh yeah, I think without question, you look back and reflect, and knowing what we know now, I think there's a number of things to unpack from what you've just said there, John, not least about men getting on with things and that whole topic and issue, and the role men play in society and where they find themselves now. But we know that in terms of the motivation behind suicide and the thoughts behind suicide, a very large number of cases involve some form of trauma or loss of some kind in their lives. And that doesn't mean to be a bereavement in the case of losing someone through death. That could be, again, as we say, breakdown in relationship, divorce, loss of access to children, loss of a job role, loss of your own identity in life. But trauma plays a huge part. And we can look to a number of significant points in Jordan's life, such as I mentioned just prior to coming on our chat today, how we emigrated to Canada. We uprooted the kids, took them away from their school friends during a recession of 92 and moved to a whole new country they didn't know, and then made a decision, some years later to come back. So then we uprooted what were now 2 Canadian kids, really, and brought them back to the UK and put them into a UK environment. Now that in itself, as parents, you deal with all the stuff that you think logistically you've got to deal with. You don't really think about the impact that might have had. we know Jordan didn't want to come back from Canada. I was dragging him kicking and screaming at 11, 12 years old out of his bed the morning we had to go to the airport. So, we maybe underestimate the impact that had had. We know about the breakdown with the relationship with his long-standing girlfriend at the time he was back in the UK and was going to university. Huge impact. They were very close and stayed good friends. So knowing what I know now and knowing that these types of events can lead to a real change in someone's outlook on life. We use the term attachment disorder quite often in Jordan's case, that he really struggled with the loss of attachment to everything from loved pets to family members dying to where he lived. So I think there was an accumulation of things in Jordan's life that meant that these affected him on an increasing level and probably just accumulated as the years went by.
Yeah, because there seems to be those interpersonal relationship skills and sort of resilience skills that we're not really taught about in school. I mean, probably in general in the last 100 years, psychology, it's all very new anyway, isn't it? It probably everybody was just surviving. There wasn't thinking too much. But like you said, when you're part of a community, it's totally different when you can just go to your grandma's house and she looks after you. And then I lived like that. My grandparents were all on the same street. I was in and out of different places. Whereas now, all the families completely split apart. It's a completely different time. Do you think, is that something that you're looking to do in terms of helping with education at some of these trigger point moments, Steve? Is that part of
I think we look at the full range really with the work we do. We go out and deliver talks and work with organisations on suicide prevention, John. We talk a lot about moving upstream. It's a term that's used a lot. We hear it a lot. And what does that really mean? It means that right now, if you look at this suicide prevention space, a very large percentage of it focuses on the crisis end, the NHS end, where there have been some significant improvements, but where there haven't been improvements is when we go further upstream, what's stopping people from getting to the point where they attempt to take their own lives. And that's where the focus is needed. I think if you use the word suicide prevention, most people would think of a training course, Mental Health First Aid England course, Papyrus training courses, assist training. To me, that's not suicide prevention, that's intervention. That's teaching you how to have this conversation with somebody who is at that point of crisis and how do you deal with that. Intervention, in my view, starts with kids. Starts when you're young. It starts with, it's okay to feel emotional. It's okay to be upset because your best mate's just split up with you and he doesn't want to talk to you again or whatever it is. These are really normal emotions to have. And we don't do, I think you're absolutely right, enough of that in schools. And I think if we could make children more, and I don't like the term resilience, often I think it's used out of context, but if we could learn to help children become more emotionally resilient and prepared for life as well as academia, then I think we'd have adults growing up who are able to cope with much better with some of the challenges that
Joseph, it's a very important discussion. Thanks for organising. That's from Joseph. There. Thanks, Joseph. So in terms of what you're doing at the moment, Steve, where are you focusing most of your energy at present? I know you want to move towards a zero suicide society. And secondly, how do you cope? Because, I've got children. James has got children. For us, as soon as I think about it, I feel like crying. It is the parents' worst nightmare, isn't it? How are you even functioning? How does that work?
It's a question I've been asked many times, and it's really interesting because it's a question I ask of Danielle, my daughter, who works with me. And I remember asking her that question last year, I think very directly. How are you dealing? Every day you're sharing pictures of your brother, you're mentioning his name. We see his name. We see his picture all the time. I think for me, what was really important, and I say this to a lot of people who contact me who've been bereaved by suicide, when they say, how do you kind of move forward with this? Because I don't think you ever move on. I think that is an absolute truth, but you can move forward. And I think it was because I made the decision very quickly that I wanted to know why. And the more I learned about the subject, the more I realized that perhaps I had the tools and the capacity to make a difference and do something about this. So what I say to those people that reach out to me is, you have to find some sense of purpose as soon as you can do. That doesn't mean to say you've got to go out and start speaking on stages or setting up a charity or doing any of that. It could be that for some of the parents I've spoken to, just can't get out of bed since they lost their child to suicide or lost someone close. That it is, your sense of purpose might be just getting to the bathroom, might be just going downstairs, making a cup of tea, might be just walking to the shops for the first time in 3 months or whatever it would be, and then doing it again the next day or whatever. So I think having a sense of purpose for me was really important. And when I asked Danielle the question, I said, how do you deal with this kind of every day? And she said, I'm probably a bit like you, Dan. She said that when I'm working on this, when I'm doing an interview like this today, or I'm delivering a talk or working on a piece of research, and I'm opening up a photograph of Jordan and putting it here or doing that, that's me in work mode. That's me in project mode. And in some way, I'm able to detach myself from the reality most of the time, not all of the time, because and people who heard me speak and deliver talks know that there is always a moment during that talk, I can feel it now as I talk about it, where the voice will break and I have to stop and just collect myself and go again, because what I'm talking about is taking me back to the moment, or it's taking me back to the realization of actually what has happened. But aside from that, it is, I'm getting up and coming to work today, and this is why I'm working. This is what I'm looking to do. So I think it was a very conscious act, really.
Yeah.
There was a question there, James. You want to read this out quickly?
Yeah. James? So, well, just before we do, Steve, I just wanted to sort of possibly make a comment on that, do you feel there's a sort of a danger that there is a level of desensitization that comes from the longer you do this, the more you talk about it, it becomes kind of normalized, that the sort of the legacy there is now into the mission of suicide prevention, that some good now has come out of that tragedy, and it's then keeping that sort of sense of how much do you let go to survive, and how much do you keep that memory very much alive to fuel this thing. So just
it's a really important question, this, and I talk to a lot of police officers. We deliver a lot of talks to police officers who get desensitized to a lot of what they experience and a lot of the traumas. So it's a very relevant question. So first of all, I've said this several times. I've said, if I ever reach a point where I do this job and deliver a talk and I no longer feel that emotion, then that is probably the time I need to stop. So I've become very conscious of that, James. Really important, because I think it can happen. And I've caught myself at moments where I've been so overwhelmed with messages coming in and somebody sharing their story of loss or whatever. And my immediate instinct, I'll be really open and honest about this, is to go, oh God, no, another message. And then I catch myself going, Steve, take yourself back 12 months. If that was the first message you received, how would you have responded? So I'm finding I have to check myself at times, because it is easy just to get caught up in the job now. But if I ever reached that point, I think I would know it was time to step away, James. So really, really important question. How do I deal with it? I think there's a balance, because every day, behind me, you probably can't see, but there's a photograph frame with multiple photographs in of a trip that Jordan and I took to Italy. My regime, whatever you would want to call it, is first thing every morning when I walk into my office here, I talk to Jordan about the day and what we've got planned. And told you. And every night before I go to bed, I talk to Jordan about the day and what we've done. So I have that conversation, and that helps kind of keep him a part of this, which I think is really important.
Okay, thank you, mate.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Some questions here.
So
Steve, you read them out,
so
James?
Kayan says, an amazing point. We don't have our tribe anymore. I think this is going back to that kind of the community, isn't it? So the family, close friends, and a support network to guide us. And I guess if I can sort of step in with that it's to sort of not go to the other extreme to say that, society is broken, that this is just an interpretation. It's a perspective from an individual. And I would argue that depending on your circumstances to whether that's true or not, we can have a perception that as a unit, we're now much more kind of disparate and spread out and disconnected. But I would also argue the other side, that we are as connected and as close with a particular family unit as ever, depending on the individual situation. So just to kind of put a caveat in there. Yeah. So, but personal agency, I absolutely agree, is incredibly essential for the individual. It's that I think we can potentially project that out onto other people and relinquish the control over agency and look to other people to give us that. But I think it's that internal sense that we really need in terms of personal agency. So I agree with that. And that's echoing your comment, Steve. So, and it needs to start with the kids. So it's teaching children how to have personal agency, which encompasses that emotional resilience. So it's not projecting it onto other people to get that. It's not being validated by others, but having that internal compass that can allow you to, I think that was sort of potentially the point.
It's difficult though, Steve, isn't it? How do kids, like parents always feeling guilty about maybe they're not good parents and they've done this and they've let their parents down. From my background with my dad, I haven't seen my dad since I was 5. He'd left sort of in a in a bit of violence. All I remember is like violence and chaos, but it hasn't affected me in probably a mental health way. So you can have people that have traumatic experiences that go off in different directions. And so it's hard to tell, isn't it, with parents? People are sometimes trying their best. Do you think they just need to be more conscious about it? Or
it's a really good point. I think the important thing is, we always say this about suicide, is that it's really important to understand that not everybody, by a long stretch of the imagination, will be impacted by suicide. Not everybody who has a traumatic event or numerous traumatic events in their childhood will go on to consider ending their own lives. Many will go on to thrive and do hugely amazing things. Yeah. What we're talking about is risk, an increased risk here. So there is more chance, more of a risk factor that you may consider thoughts of suicide or be more prone to that if you've experienced some of these things. So that by having these conversations, by being more open, by listening to our children better or our friends or whatever, we reduce the risk through better understanding of what they're experiencing of them reaching that point. But yes, I think we've got to be really cautious of saying, if you've had a childhood trauma, then there's a good chance you're going to end up attempting suicide, because that isn't the case. It is one of a number of contributing risk factors.
Yeah. So I had a parent DM me saying, they were so scared about their 9-year-old son playing computer games, and she was so fearful of him being suicidal in the future and things like that. There was so much guilt and pain already associated that she was sort of projecting out, and it's saying, you can do your best. It's not really good to just live in this state of complete worry that everything you're doing is going to be a mistake. Is there, Steve, on that one?
No, really good point. Yeah.
So we've got a comment here from Joseph talking about medicating children. So we've got sort of Ritalin. We've got obviously the rise in the awareness of ADHD. So he's talking about symptom management and prevention. So I was against it until my 6-year-old son with special needs started to talk about suicide to his teachers at school. So, it's the conversations. Is it a sticking plaster? Are we sort of creating this situation where we are medicating children, don't necessarily need medication, but maybe it's a knee-jerk reaction? you've got to obviously take into consideration the individual cases. You can't possibly comment on those kind of things, but it's like, it's a societal awareness of like, I don't know that you can just throw something like medication at it. Is that oversimplifying it? And
I think it's a really important point, James. And I think, first of all, I'll come back to a point you made just a moment ago. Each individual case has to be looked at and examined rather than it being a catch-all approach. I think a lot of people would suggest that, not necessarily just for children, that medication has been kind of the go-to approach by many GPs for anyone experiencing high levels of anxiety or clinical depression. We know that certainly in the case of adults, a combination of medication and good talking therapy together, not necessarily one or the other, can be really, really effective. But I think there has been, for a long period of time, it's the kind of default that we need to go to. So medication can be really helpful. It can also be really harmful. There's some great work being done by a wonderful charity we know well called the Ollie Foundation, and it was set up by 3 parents originally that lost their children to suicide, on the principle that one life lost is too many. They have done some amazing work around safer prescribing. It's all on their website, the Ollie, OLLIE Foundation. Look at that. And I certainly, Jonathan's comment, was it a moment ago?
Joseph,
beg your pardon.
Joseph,
I would certainly recommend looking at that website and looking at the work they're doing around safer prescribing, because that's what it's about. It's about recognizing that medication plays a role, but it's got to be done in a safe and measured way. And there is research and evidence to show how that should be done. You know, one of the things we've got to consider about most GPs, which a lot of people are quite amazed by, is most general practitioners and doctors do not receive any form of suicide prevention training at all. So, you know, they're not necessarily, you know, experts in this. They're general practitioners.
100%.
Clues kind of in the term there, isn't it, really?
So with nutrition and all sorts of things, it's quite basic, isn't it, on that time? In terms of that, Steve, could you give us a view of Jordan's journey with medication? Do you remember the time that he went onto meds and what kind of meds and the reason for it? And just, we always speak about mental health, but for me, could you give me a little bit of a description of maybe what's going on in someone's mind at that point? What are they how are they actually thinking about things? Is it like an infinite negative loop, or is it do you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a clinician. I think that's really important. I put that caveat out there. I'm not a clinical expert. I'm obviously talking about this subject from a lot of research, a lot of conversations, and from a lived experience perspective. But if we come back to the question of medication for Jordan, when finally I think Jordan himself recognized that he was struggling with his mental health, and at this time he was age 30, that he went for the first time to see a doctor about this, and he was prescribed an SSRI, one of the antidepressant medications. I think it might have been sertraline or something similar to that at the time. And then some social prescribing of cognitive behavioral therapy for 14 weeks, which is fairly standard after that initial diagnosis. We discovered through notes we found in Jordan's loft after his death, as we were clearing out the house, all his notes from his CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy sessions. And what we discovered was that our understanding was Jordan was going to these therapy sessions for anxiety and depression. We never pushed too deeply. You know, we asked him how they were going. He'd say fine. He would never open up too much about them. But what we discovered was Jordan was experiencing some form of body dysmorphia. He believed he had spots all over his body that were unsightly. He would not get changed in swimming baths in front of other people. He would not look in mirrors. He would pass shop windows without looking in. This was quite a significant issue he was dealing with. Nobody knew at all. We didn't know. We only found this after his death. So coming back to the question about what's going on in someone's mind, we had no idea that what was going on. So what someone is carrying with them is a whole host of things, going back again to the worries that are plaguing them every day about their gambling addiction or their career or their relationship or their body image in this case. And we know a lot of young people, almost an equal number of young males to females now, are really concerned about body image and see imperfections in themselves. In terms of the medication itself, we know that Jordan didn't particularly like being on medication, so he would typically wean himself off. Not a particularly safe method, because then he would go back. And again, not coming from a medical background here at all, but what I have learned is that there is a process with many of the forms of antidepressant drugs where they take a little while to kick in and actually do the job that they're supposed to do. And in fact, in some cases, can actually take that person lower. Now, I didn't have enough knowledge at this time, but just prior to Jordan's death, he had been to see his GP in a very low state. I did have a conversation with that doctor approximately 5 or 6 days after Jordan's death. The doctor taught me through the appointment. He didn't know Jordan had died till I told him, but he said, yeah, Jordan did present. He was not in a great place at all. I said, well, how did he present? Well, he's quite upset and he was quite tearful. And I thought, wow, okay, that's really interesting. So he's prescribed, the antidepressant. And 2 days before he was due for the review with the GP, he took his own life. But we know that was very typically a window of time where he might have gone even further down due to the drug. No guarantee of this, but he may have gone further down before the drug kicked in and worked. So he was at a very critical point. So that GP did what he was trained to do, I'm sure, gave the prescription, come back and see me in 14 days, way too long. I want you to think and put yourself in that GP's shoes now. You've got a 34-year-old adult sitting in front of you in tears, a male.
It's alarm bells, isn't it, to think?
It is to me. It is to me, but I have a personal vested interest in this, clearly. But
so what then, Steve? Can in your assessment of that situation? I mean, my wife works in the NHS, and we can't talk about specifics, but we certainly have conversations around things that haven't gone the way they should have gone. And it's this reporting system. It's almost like in the aviation industry that there's this openness to talk about where there was an accident, the accident investigation team come in, and it's just complete honesty and transparency to prevent this from happening again. So where are the mechanisms that can be brought into place that then there can be training that's brought in for GPs so that we don't just say, well, they're a general practitioner, they can't be a master of one thing, they're a master of none, master of many things. And how do we make this then a thing that, because it's happening a lot, that there is training that's brought in so that if somebody presents in that way, they go, okay, there's a series of protocols or something that can be, even if it's a Google search that they do right there and then, that they take them through this kind of, some sort of drop down questionnaire that says, these are the questions to ask. If this is the case, then we refer them, or this is the action that needs to be taken.
Yeah, it's really complex because there are effectively suicide risk assessments in the NHS currently, and by most people's estimation, they are not fit for purpose. And I know a number of families, particularly Phillip Perry, who lost his son to suicide, who was ranked as not at risk of suicide through one of those assessments and took his life within 24 hours of that assessment. So we know they're not fit for purpose, and that's been common knowledge for quite some time. I think training, absolutely frontline training in suicide prevention specifically, is critical for that first point of contact. There's a lot of work being done through the Suicide Prevention Coalition at the moment to push for a no wrong door approach, which means that instead of people being funneled on a journey, first point of contact, the GP, then a referral to CAMS, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Care Services, which could be 16 months, that people need to be able to receive the care and support they need that's right for them right at the first appointment. So there's a big, that needs to happen. We cannot have these waiting lists of weeks and months anymore. I think that's really important. But it is the training. There's some fantastic work being done by a doctor I know really well in the Derbyshire area, Dr. Sohrab Pandey, who's been training with his team, all GPs in the Derbyshire Healthcare Trust, with great results on suicide prevention and postvention, supporting those after the fact. So it can be done, but it needs to happen at scale.
Yeah. So we've got a note of appreciation from Alison saying...
Alison, lovely to see Alison. Yeah, no, Alison, well, she works in the veterinary profession. We interviewed her for Jordan Space, our radio show with Rosie, a veterinary surgeon who came on. And yes, we'll be seeing Alison at our conference at the end of the year again, if not before, Alison.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, she's appreciative to you, saying you're an amazing person. You're obviously speaking from the heart, and you've helped her and so many others. So she's showing her appreciation and thank you for that.
Ash Grant, James on there. Hello,
so Ash, there's such an important message. I lost my brother-in-law to suicide in October. Sorry to hear that, Ash. And his journey is horrific. I'm determined now to know how to have the correct conversations with my own kids and those around them, so that no other family has to go through this. Steve, you're amazing. Now, thanks, Ash.
Can I just add a point, James, if that's okay, just for Ash there,
absolutely.
That if she hasn't been to our website, thejordanlegacy.com, and go to the help and resources section, there's a specific section that says I'm worried about my child, and there's lots of help and resources for children of all ages on that particular resource there.
Yeah. I mean, as John mentioned earlier, I'm a father of two sons and a daughter. I've got a son who's 28, daughter who's 25, and a son who's 23. And I don't know, there's a day that goes by that I don't think about how they're feeling, what they're going through right now. And I'm almost hypersensitive to it because of these conversations and things that you see in the media, and just my own sense of self and what I've been through personally, that I have a very, acute sense of my own mental health and how I feel, and then project that outwards to my relationship with the kids. And there's this fine line between being overprotective and interfering, and like every sort of 5, you're okay, to actually just sitting with that emotion and trying to make some sense of what is going on. But I check in with them periodically, and I know that sometimes they'll say, "Yeah, Dad, everything's fine," and I'm like, "Is everything fine?" And to just kind of reaffirm that, and then I come off the phone thinking, "Okay, well, they're all right for today," and then it's tomorrow. I mean, I don't know what your sort of responses or sense to that, to kind of give some kind of perspective on that particular behavior. Any of that, or in yourself, that you did prior to this thing, that now that it's going to be very different, but that's kind of where I'm at now with it, that this awareness of hypersensitivity.
Yeah, I think we can. I think the media plays a large part in this. What we're doing today, in some respects, it's educational, it's important, but there is a risk sometimes that we can, bombard people with fear too often. So, I think continually the message we put at the Jordan Legacy, we put across is one of hope, because we know that most suicides are preventable if we do the right things. I think, I think back to my childhood days where my folks had no idea I was jumping off building site ladders and climbing up trees I should never have been up, and what the risks probably were involved with that. But we're talking a very different world now, where social media is not a thing and so accessible to so many people. So we've got different challenges, and they're more psychological challenges than they were physical challenges. I don't think as kids we had those psychological challenges. We might have had bullying and issues there, but even that you could leave at the school gate.
100%.
And you can't leave that anymore because it follows you home and it's on social media. So I think it is a balance. It is about being protective of the risks, and I think the biggest risks at the moment are online harms. I think we have to be vigilant. I know within my own family circle, I see some really excellent parenting going on where there are real restrictions, real limitations on access there. But I think we mustn't underestimate the intelligence of our young people as well, because if they are educated about the risks, they do take them seriously.
Yeah.
And I know this through some of the work the NSPCC have done and others, that we need to be having more conversations with the kids about this. I'm talking kids, you know, up to kind of 17 years old, you know, maybe even a bit older. We underestimate them in terms of how sensitive they are themselves to these issues. We're seeing this with drinking cultures at the moment. We're seeing a real shift now of young people wanting to be healthier. You know, maybe that was education. Maybe that's seen too many deaths from drugs or alcohol or whatever it was. But, you know, we can do the same with online harm as well through education. They will make the informed choices. Us worrying continually isn't necessarily going to change, you know, what may or may not happen. So I think it is about allowing the kids to be heard, to allow them to be involved in this conversation and not talking at them. I think that's really important.
Yeah, it's big, isn't it? I heard like nightclubs will be shut down by 2029. There's the whole shift away from alcohol is changing now. It's more coffee shop culture. So there are huge changes. And yeah, people sort of assume the younger generation are weaker, but I don't really believe that. I think they're actually, it's just a different environment. It's a different environment, and it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. But
so I seriously can't wait for some of our kids to grow up and start running our countries and get rid of the current incumbents that are there who, well, we won't go into that.
But in terms of Steve, on a...
Then he got political then, as Ben Elton.
Yeah, I know, he was getting some real politics there. We'll get
segue that in.
But on a philosophical level, Steve, because we're always sort of, as humans, there's probably a part of us that are looking for this meaning or purpose, and it's very rare that anybody finds it or comes across it or has a lesson in life that gives them some type of meaning or purpose. Have you completely switched your mind from how you was before and how you think about life?
Yeah, I think so, without question. And the sad thing is, it takes this kind of trauma and tragedy very often in life for people to get a better sense of meaning and purpose out of life, and we've got to find some way to unravel that and help people. But again, I think it just comes back to education and children. We spend so much time focusing on academia, on performance, which then has the knock-on effect to teachers and Ofsted and all this. Everything's around performance and targets. What it's not about is allowing children to very often be children. I think first of all, we're taking some of that away. But it's not about talking about hopes and dreams and visions for the future. It's about, can you get this grade? Can you make the next step? And when you get the next step, are you going to be able to afford to buy a house? And most already recognise long before they're leaving school that's not an option anymore. So we put pressure on kids from such an early age, and we knock out of them all the dreams. I'm doing a fantastic piece of work at the moment with another speaker at our conference, Dr. Manoj Krishna. He's a former spinal surgeon of 20 plus years who just got tired of seeing all kind of the suffering that was going on in the world, and created an app called Happier Me. And it's an app that gets people to really understand their kind of inner self much more and understand why they're feeling the way they do. And they do some great work with children, and they interview children. And what he learned was most of the answers the kids had themselves. What wasn't happening was nobody was giving them the opportunity to share those and get that out of them. And if you can encourage children to have those dreams and move forward, then you'll get kids with a sense of purpose in life. But I just think we're knocking it out of them most of the time with our current education system. Not our educators; some of them are doing amazing jobs, but our system doesn't really facilitate dreams and visions and goals, except for the few that decide that's what they're going to do in life.
Yeah, and yeah, I totally agree, Steve. I think the education system and the family dynamics, and we've got to support people in all different ways, haven't we, to be able to even just have a house, have a family, to be able to survive economically is super important. But if you're a guy at, say, my age, Jordan's age, or any age really, and you are feeling like you're losing that bit of hope, what's the options? Is it the Samaritans? Is that where people, where do you go? Do you speak to your friends? Because sometimes you speak to people around you and you don't know if people have got the capacity to handle what you've got to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, John, that there are lots of support organisations out there. Sometimes it's knowing where to go. Again, the Jordan Legacy, we've got a huge number of resources there, but I could point you to Andy's Man Club, doing great work. I could signpost you to the Hub of Hope, where all you've got to do is put your postal code in a search bar and services local to you will come up. I could point you in all kinds of directions. The services, and Samaritans is one of them, and I think most people would recognise Samaritans as being that point where I'm in crisis and I need someone to listen to me. But here's an important observation I want to make, really, is that your question was, what if someone is struggling? Where do they reach out and where do they go? Most of us will be familiar with the hashtag "It's okay to talk," but that puts a real pressure on the person who's really struggling to talk. It's almost expecting them to reach out for that help. And we've started adopting a different hashtag that I was really surprised was not being used a lot, so I've pinched it for now. I don't think it's copyright on it, by the way. But it says it's okay to ask. And what that is, that's about us reaching in and saying, look, how are you really doing? By taking that time to really have a conversation. Whenever you or I see somebody, quite often, we say, how are you doing? And if it's in the workplace, for example, they can say, oh yeah, I'm fine. And you go, inside your head's going, that's a relief, because I was just on my way to a meeting. And if they'd stopped me and told me their life story was really bad, I'd be late for my meeting. We don't ever ask that question wanting to know an answer other than I'm fine. So we have to stop asking that question if we don't really want to hear the answer.
Yeah, I agree, Steve. As soon as I hear fine, that just reminds me of, I'm not being sexist, but a woman, if she says she's fine, you know that she's not fine. And it's like that word is definitely
dangerous ground there, John.
I've got my wife here, so she knows. If she says she's fine,
you see something fly across the room.
Is that the person with the shotgun behind you?
Yeah, I know I'm in trouble if she says she's fine. So that word is like alarm bells for me. I'm just like, okay, what's wrong?
The marriage was going so well up until this point.
But I know people do. The mask is heavy for a lot of people, isn't it? Because you've got what do you do in a workplace? Because we haven't touched too much on workplace environments, because they can be super pressurized, Steve, and some management can be really toxic. I know people are under pressure to meet targets and things like that, but you don't sometimes want to show any weakness at work, do you? You don't want to be labeled somebody who's like a problem. What do you do about that?
We spend so much time at work, John. I can't remember what the exact stat is now, but we'll spend more time during our 30-plus year career, whatever it might be, 40-year career, in the workplace than we will do at home or socially. And interesting, looking at the most recent May 2024 Deloitte report that comes out every year. Now it studies over 3,000 adults and asks them questions about their experience at work from a well-being perspective. The poor mental health is costing employers in this country at the moment 51 billion pounds, not million, billion pounds. Now that is up from 49 billion in 2019. So it's a huge cost. 46% of working
What was the
parents
cost
are
of that,
active.
Steve? Sorry, what was the?
So
what
it's,
was that
it's currently at the last report in May of 2024. I'm just reminding myself of the stats: 51 billion pounds.
And what was that the cost of?
Well, that's basically cost a range of things. So, as an example, 46% of those parents that were surveyed were concerned about their children's mental health, and as a result, having to take time off. And that was costing employers about 8 billion. Just in terms of parents concerned about their children's mental health. Many, I think over 60% were saying they experienced some form of burnout, which is up 51% from 2021. So it's a combination of things, but all, a lot of it related to poor mental health. And you think if those companies did more, because the evidence again says from Deloitte, all the evidence says that for every £4 spent or invested in employee well-being, for every £1 spent, there's a £4 return. So the numbers are there. It kind of backs it up. So you think, doesn't it make good? Not only is it morally the right thing for you to do as a company, first of all, let's get that to look after your employees and ensure their well-being is right. It actually makes good business sense. But so many businesses have still not got their heads around that. They still see well-being as this fluffy thing that's left to HR people to deal with in its entirety, and we'll have a few mental health first aiders. We'll tick that box, and we'll put a bowl of fruit on reception, and we'll do a yoga class once a month. That is not creating a psychologically safe workplace. It's about two strategies. It's about a top-down leadership and a bottom-up involving your employees. And I could say it goes even further than that. Involve your clients, involve your suppliers, and get everyone involved in workplace wellbeing policies. But until it's taken seriously, businesses are going to suffer this kind of financial loss. I mean, presenteeism, basically being at work when you shouldn't be because you're not well enough, costs businesses 3 times more than absenteeism does. The numbers are all there, but we've got a long way to go to get workplaces to wake up, really.
To convince,
So Darren makes the point about a few years ago, I hadn't heard of this, but the Ask Twice initiative.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about sort of asking somebody how they are, I mean, I tend to sort of say, is that you really okay? When you say you're okay, you can tell me it's okay. Yeah. So it's the fact,
and that's great because the whole mannerism there and everything is you genuinely are asking and saying it's okay. So you're. But it's like,
why do we need an initiative? Why does there have to be this almost kind of prescriptive way in which we talk to each other, that we've got to have almost a kind of a governmental kind of thing that's like, well, this is now the recommendations of how we speak to each other in the workplace. It's like, at what point have we lost the ability to interact with each other in a way that makes sense? And, are we being governed by these kind of auspices that we've lost the unique ability to interact with each other as a species, that we now need to be told how to talk to each other, that it's not instinctive, it's not intuitive. And we're second guessing these conversations now because it's all, well, I can't say that because this happens, or I can't say, and then we lose the ability to talk. So there's this kind of balance to be struck, isn't there, about what is innately commonsensical.
Well, I was going to say it's common sense. Yeah.
Of now, it's unfortunately,
like, are we threat of litigation? All kinds of other pressures mean that we've kind of lost this innate ability to ask the very thing that actually we probably should be asking.
And then that downstream effect is that it doesn't get talked about, and we're back to square one again. These situations are happening because there's this kind of tension between what we can talk about and what we can't talk about, what's appropriate to talk about at work and what's inappropriate. It doesn't relate to the job that we're doing. So can we have a chat around the water cooler anymore? Or is that seen as, unproductive time? So that's sort of knocked on the head.
Yeah. And now, I know we're reaching time, but now that's all down to the culture of the business. The kind of final word on this is that we talk a lot about creating a psychologically safe workplace or environment. And we very often mistakenly think that it's the leaders that create that psychologically safe place or determine what it should be through policies, procedures, and what they put in place. But actually, it's the employee. When they turn up to work, if they believe they can open up and have those conversations, that if they are struggling, they can tell someone, whether that's their line manager, HR, or the CEO, whoever it would be, and they would be treated reasonably without judgment and supported. Yep. Once we reach that, it's the employees who determine whether that's a psychologically safe culture, not what it says in a policy document.
Self-determinism, isn't it? Ultimately, self-determinism.
Yeah. So, Steve, what's your aims for the next 10 years, and where can people go to find out about exactly what you're doing? Where's the best place to find you?
Good. Well, firstly, I'm reassured that you think I'm going to survive another 10 years, John. That's encouraging.
100%.
Yeah, so that's good. We're doing a lot of work with Jordan Legacy around awareness and our talks and everything. But I think one of the big projects for us at the moment is an initiative called One Voice, One Hope. It's a pretty massive ambition, but we're working alongside a number of really wonderful people who are suicide prevention advocates, from the Three Dads Walking to many of the others that are known faces in the suicide prevention space. And our job is to recognize that there's some amazing people doing amazing jobs in pockets around the country. If we can find a way to bring them all together to work collaboratively and share their knowledge and experience in a channeled way and learn from each other, learn to let go of the egos that exist sometimes in this space, and sadly it does, and really truly collaborate, then I think we can move towards the term you used earlier, John, of a zero suicide society, which, just for clarification, our definition of that is not that we believe we can prevent every suicide, but it's a society that is willing and able to do all it can to prevent all preventable suicides.
I get that. Yeah. That's amazing, Steve. And where was the best place to find you? And the details,
thejordanlegacy.com. Yeah, go to the website. I think we get a lot of praise, which I'm really pleased about the website. Everything we do, our mission, our focus, everything is there. So that's thejordanlegacy.com.
Appreciate it. No, really appreciate you coming on, Steve. And obviously you're doing amazing work and going to obviously save a lot of people's lives. And it is a real legacy for Jordan as well. And it is, life is challenging, isn't it? A lot of people are finding life challenging at the moment in a lot of different ways. And if we can just do our part to sort of support each other, make the world a better place, and do all we can, I think that's a good place to start.
Definitely agree. Thank you, John. Thank you, James. Really, really appreciate the invitation today.
You're very welcome. So Alison, just to finish off, is again thanking us for hosting this. And Alison's going to give you a virtual hug.
Well, all of us apparently. So thank you, Alison. We'll take
give you all that. Hug. I'll take that. Thank you. Back at you, Alison. Virtual hugs back. I'm very good at virtual hugs.
Lots of emotion from blokes today. Yeah. So it's okay to show emotion. It's good to be open and
love the term
tell the truth,
well.
isn't it?
Always good. Yeah.
Bloke.
Yeah.
It's a good one. But I appreciate that, guys. Thank you very much, Steve. And I'll be following you along on the Jordan Legacy.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Thank you. I think he's frozen.
I think he has, just right unfortunately right at the end. So
yeah, well, he does this occasionally. Just it's all for dramatic effect. It just
I think his wife has unplugged him after that comment.
It's probably what it is before he really gets himself in deep hot water. So I will finish it here. Steve, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Thank you to the audience for their questions and comments. Hugely appreciated. Massive. It's an emotive subject, and bless you for coming on and talking about it and all the work you're doing. Thank you so much. Love to all.